Hey everyone, it is Thursday, November 9th. You're listening to the Mo News podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
She's back, everybody. In the place where we read the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, welcome back.
Guess who's back? Back again. Thank you, Moshe. I had a lot of fun covering politics here on Long Island. Good time was had. As we talked about, I love a good election night.
Mm-hmm. Any surprises that the rest of us care about?
For the most part, Republicans had a pretty good night on Long Island. There were none of those big ticket items. There were none of the national issues like abortion and marijuana. I know you talked about it yesterday. We're going to talk about it a little bit later. So it was very much a local race. And for the most part, Republicans did pretty well. Democrats held on to some seats too. So no huge surprises. As you know, it's a lot of hurry up and wait. You get there, you prep, you're kind of like you do a run through and then you just wait for the results to come in. And then they come in, there's like 30 minutes of just nonstop action and speeches, and then the room clears. It's a very strange flow of events.
Well, it's good to have you back. It's never the same doing the show solo.
Thank you, Moshe, and I totally agree. It's a lot more fun when it's the two of us.
You're like, Moshe, that was a boring podcast on Wednesday.
No, actually, it was very good. It was very informative. It's not the same, though, without two people. No. Even when
I got you.
When you were on paternity leave and it was just me, I was like, oh, my God, is anyone out there? Is anyone still listening to this thing? Okay, let's get to some headlines. Another GOP debate, and once again, without Donald Trump. He held a rally nearby in Miami. We'll have the big takeaways. Plus, the latest from the Middle East, more Gazans flee south as Hamas tells the New York Times its goal is never-ending war. And a former Israeli prime minister says it's time for Benjamin Netanyahu to step down. Some medical news, the FDA approves a new obesity drug from Eli Lilly. And remember that first approved postpartum depression drug? Well, it's going to cost about $16,000.
We'll get into it.
Swipe left, Bumble CEO Whitney Wolfe is stepping down as some new numbers show young people not so into dating apps. Moshe, pandas appear to be the latest victims of tensions between the United States and China. 2023, the hottest year on record. And Bravo's Andy Cohen says CNN needs to reverse course and let him and Anderson Cooper drink alcohol during their New Year's Eve broadcast.
The same way we tape this podcast every day, Jill.
I was actually thinking that maybe we should do a drunk New Year's Eve show.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
and Moshe, of course, is on this day in history.
It's a big anniversary for a big 90s rap group. Jill, we'll test your knowledge.
Don't dare me, Moshe. 90s were my time to shine.
All right.
And then there were five Republican presidential candidates not named Donald Trump faced off in Miami last night. This debate moderated by NBC News anchors Lester Holt and Kristen Welker, and also joined by conservative talk show host Hugh Hewitt. On stage, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, businessman Vivek Ramaswamy, and Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina. And once again, Republican frontrunner, former President Donald Trump not participating, instead holding a rally in a nearby suburb as he looks to court Hispanic voters. Moshe, you have affectionately been calling these the JV debates or the race for second place, given Trump's huge lead. Last night was the first debate since Hamas attacked Israel last month and the ensuing war. So certainly an opportunity for candidates with foreign policy experience like Nikki Haley.
Jill, I stand by the fact that this is one of those JV debates. The candidates here all polling in the teens or single digits, while Trump continues to dominate with 50 to 60% in the polls. Doesn't even need to show up. He was 10 miles away in Hialeah. The mayor there saying they were naming a street after him. He called his Republican competitors unwatchable. And him not showing up for these debates is making it really challenging for them to break out, for them to contrast themselves against him. As far as the debate that took place with the 500-pound gorilla, not there. Well, it really appears like DeSantis and Nikki Haley right now are emerging as the people who will compete with Trump, if that is possible. And the two of them continue to dominate on Wednesday night. He continues to represent sort of MAGA light, that wing of the party. She represents sort of the more traditional Republican Party. Given the state of the world, foreign policy dominated the top of the debate. All five of them on stage were asked about the Hamas-Israel war. All of them said they would support Israel even more than Biden, asked what they would tell the Israeli prime minister right now. Here's the rundown. DeSantis said, I would tell them to finish the job. Haley, finish them. Scott, wipe Hamas off the map. Christie, go in and make sure Hamas can't do this again. Ramaswamy, smoke out those terrorists. You get the feeling. So you get the sense there of where they would stand on foreign policy in the Middle East. No talk of humanitarian pause or even civilian casualties. Staying with the war, there was also talk about anti-Semitism here at home and around the world. Nikki Haley comparing pro-Hamas protests on campus to the KKK, saying that anti-Semitism is a form of racism and should be taken as seriously. DeSantis saying funding should be withheld from campuses where jihad is happening. Tim Scott also saying he would consider withholding federal funding from public universities where this sort of thing is happening. So while they were all united on that stuff, there was a division on Ukraine. Nikki Haley, Chris Christie calling for continued aid to Ukraine. The others hedging a bit, realizing that half of Republicans, almost the majority of Republicans now who vote, aren't into funding Ukraine anymore. Beyond foreign policy, there was also talk of abortion, given the result in Ohio, where yet another state here has put abortion rights into the Constitution. And so they were asked about federal abortion ban. That's something that Tim Scott supports at 15 weeks. Something, though, Nikki Haley says is completely unrealistic, and that they need to be honest with Republican voters that it ain't happening. It's happening at the state level. And Christie chiming in that there's no federal role for abortion, that ultimately it's a state thing. Ron DeSantis, by the way, supports a 15-week federal ban as well, though given the Senate, the House, that ain't happening. They discussed a whole bunch of other topics. No major breakthrough moments. Honestly, the most memorable thing, Jill, last night is that Nikki Haley and Vivek Ramaswamy freaking hate each other. We put a mashup together on Instagram. They cannot stand one another. They're having a fight in the debate within every 10 minutes or so. Now, we should say that none of the other candidates appear to like Vivek Ramaswamy, but she hates him the most. At one point, he referenced her daughter being on TikTok. She said, "Keep my daughter out of your mouth, you scum." So it's remarkable, just the level of hatred these two have for one another. Bottom line, verdict, nothing changes the dynamic after last night. Trump continues to dominate the Republican field. The fact that he won't give them the time of day, it makes it challenging for them. But though they also really seem reluctant to attack him. They had 2 hours in primetime last night on a number of networks, all the NBC networks, to do so. And none of them really laid a hand on him. None of them are really contrasting with him. And so the question is that a mistake? And so we will see what happens. In the meantime, that's about it from the 2024 field, with about 8 to 10 weeks to go before voting begins.
And it follows Tuesday's election, an off year, but as you mentioned yesterday, it did give some big wins to Democrats and perhaps helped ease some of their concerns after polls showed Donald Trump beating Joe Biden in some key swing states. Biden himself tweeting, quote, "Across the country tonight, democracy won and MAGA lost. Voters vote, polls don't. Now let's go win next year." Quickly, some takeaways from Tuesday after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, the abortion issue, getting Democrats out to vote. In Ohio, voters passed a ballot initiative that enshrined abortion rights in the state constitution.
Yeah, we mentioned this is the 7th state to do it. All ballot initiatives since the Roe v. Wade was overturned last year have all gone pro-choice, Jill, even in red states, multiple red states now. And a whole nother group of states are set to vote on this next year, including Arizona, Florida, Iowa, Missouri. And so Democrats are hopeful that, if they've seen this in Kansas, seen this in Ohio, that they'll continue to see this move across the country, given where polls are, despite what the Supreme Court may have said. But keep in mind, by the way, one of the reasons the Supreme Court ruled the way it did was to hand it back to the states. So it has been handed back to the states, and each state is determining where it stands.
In Virginia, Democrats won back control of the House and kept control of their state Senate after the Republican governor, Glenn Youngkin, campaigned on enacting new abortion restrictions. In Pennsylvania, a Democratic state Supreme Court candidate was actually able to expand Biden's margin of victory in 2020, also winning a race where abortion rights were a big issue.
Yeah, expect to hear a lot more from Biden on that front. Democrats, as they try to nationalize that issue next year. Staying with politics here, keeping tabs on what's happening in Congress. The House voted late Tuesday to censure Democratic Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib of Michigan. Quite a rebuke. There's been just over 24 of these in the history of Congress. This is the second this year, though. Tlaib is the only Palestinian American in Congress. The vote was 234 to 188, nearly 24 Democrats joining Republicans. Congress censuring her for her outspoken criticism of Israel, lending support to Hamas, and using the expression "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." One congressman saying that she has levied unbelievable falsehoods about our greatest ally. Now, keep in mind that censure is one step below expulsion, but doesn't actually do anything. It's basically just a verbal rebuke. And it was notable here that you had 22 Democrats vote with Republicans on this measure. Even the Democratic leader, Hakeem Jeffries, saying, Tlaib probably shouldn't be using that language because it is seen as anti-Semitic. An important history here when it comes to the expression, we did a little bit on the Instagram account yesterday, "from the river to the sea." The history of that expression goes back to the 1960s, really, when the Palestine Liberation Organization, the group headed by Arafat that was conducting terrorist attacks around the world, basically said, "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," saying that Israel will no longer exist, that there will be a Palestine that replaces Israel, the Jewish state, a call to arms, the river to the sea being from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. Many Jews, and in this case, majority members of Congress, see it as an anti-Semitic slogan here, given its origins. Keep in mind, the Hamas terrorist group has also adopted "from the river to the sea," their intention being that a river to the sea will be a Palestine free of a Jewish state. Now, there are some protesters, including Rashida Tlaib, who say, "I mean it differently. I did not mean the elimination of Israel. I mean Palestine will be free alongside Israel." But given, again, the origins and the history of the phrase, Congress decided to rebuke her on Tuesday night. And one comparison that I heard here, Jill, it's sort of like the Confederate flag, which means something and was later defended as a symbol of Southern pride. But many people point to its origins, right, in the Confederacy and say, well, it's hate speech because of that. And so in a time where we are trying to be sensitive to the concerns of various minority groups and how they feel, the feeling was there's lots of ways to talk about the cause without using an expression that makes Jews feel like they have no right to homeland.
She had also posted a video accusing President Biden of supporting genocide in Gaza. So that was also a part of this as well. Okay, now to what's actually happening on the ground in the Middle East. 50,000 more Gazans made use of a humanitarian corridor that was opened by the Israeli military to leave the northern Gaza Strip and head south as Israel ramps up fighting against Hamas in Gaza City, which is in the northern part of the Strip. And we also wanted to mention a couple of interviews that are getting some attention. First, from the New York Times, Hamas leaders talk about creating a permanent state of war. They tell the New York Times that the October 7th attack, the war, and all of the Palestinian casualties are what they describe as a necessary cost of what they call a great accomplishment, the shattering of the status quo and opening up what they hope will be a permanent war with Israel. They say they see no peace with Israel, only complete destruction. One Hamas member saying Hamas's goal is not to run Gaza and to bring it water and electricity and such. This battle was not because we wanted fuel or laborers. It did not seek to improve the situation in Gaza, that this battle is to completely overthrow the situation.
Yeah, it comes as there's been a debate within the group because they've been running Gaza for 16 years as to whether they were going to become a government and then learn to deal with, the Israeli government and go through the same evolution that the PLO went through when they became the Palestinian Authority, to go from terrorist group to governing entity. It's clear here that there's been a debate internally within Hamas for years, and a decision was made in the lead up to October 7th that, nope, we're going to stay with our original intent here. and go for the destruction of Israel, that there is no living alongside this country. So it was interesting to hear the reaction to this, Jill, because it struck some people as surprising, like, oh my God, I can't believe what they're saying. And then some people who've been watching Hamas for a very long time being like, well, welcome to the party. This is what they've been saying for a while. At least they're being honest about it. And some Israeli government leaders embarrassed that they didn't see this coming, given that this has been the debate internally, and basically took their eye off the ball ahead of October 7th.
And to that end, an interview in Politico that is making some waves as well. Former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert telling Politico that current Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has, quote, been destroyed emotionally by his massive failure on national security. He said Netanyahu is in a state of, quote, nervous breakdown as he sought to avoid being thrown out of office for failing to safeguard national security in the murderous Hamas attacks of October 7th. He says this means Israel is now steering off course strategically, insisting that the priority should be to negotiate an endgame with the international community involving a return to talks on the formation of a Palestinian state instead of turning back the clock to full military oversight over Gaza. We told you Netanyahu had said in an interview with ABC News that Israel is preparing to take control of Gaza's security for, quote, an indefinite period after Hamas has been crushed. And with that, Olmert says, quote, every minute he, Benjamin Netanyahu, is prime minister, he is a danger to Israel. I seriously mean it. I am certain that the Americans understand he is in bad shape.
So something to know about Olmert and Netanyahu is they hate each other's guts. They've been rivals for a very long time. And so these are two former prime ministers. I mean, it's like sort of saying that like Donald Trump had bad things to say about Barack Obama or Joe Biden. Like, not a surprise here that Olmert is saying this. In fact, there was a defamation lawsuit a couple of years ago that Netanyahu won because Olmert was saying that Netanyahu was out of his mind and needed a psychiatrist. And actually, Netanyahu won that lawsuit for defamation. So these two go way back. And one thing to keep in mind is they were in the same government of Ariel Sharon 15 years ago when the decision was made to move out of Gaza. That Israel was like, we're going to end our occupation of Gaza. We're going to remove 10,000 settlers. Who was for it? Ehud Olmert. It was his brainchild. Who was against it? Netanyahu. So these two have been going at it for a very long time. Important context here. Olmert, by the way, served prison time for corruption. Netanyahu himself is facing corruption charges, which could send him to prison at some point. Israeli politics is sort of like Illinois politics, where most leaders at some point go to prison. Anyway, keep that all in mind.
Who's it? Rob? What's his name? Rod
Blagojevich.
I would never be able to pronounce that name.
Blago. It just goes by Blago. We had George Ryan. Anyway, having been to both places, there's a resemblance of Illinois politics and Israeli politics. That said, still notable at a time of unity in Israel that you do have a former prime minister saying, listen, Netanyahu's got a major problem. He's got to get out and he's causing us trouble. Now, Olmert believes that it was still the right move for Israel to get out of Gaza nearly 20 years ago. And he says that Netanyahu screwed it all up with his bad policies towards the Palestinians. So that's important context here, but still an interesting interview nonetheless, because, you have someone shooting inside the tent, so to speak.
And it is notable as well because he's not the only person saying that. There have been rallies as well for people calling on Netanyahu to resign.
Is not popular right now.
So it's not as if Olmert is just this rogue person who's like, no, he's got to go, and it's this personal
He represents
vendetta.
about 3/4 of Israelis right now who are like, he's either got to go now or got to go right after the war. Now, as far as the post-war Gaza is concerned, the White House, interestingly, on Wednesday moved closer to the Israeli position, saying, listen, there will be a time period where Israeli forces will have to have security responsibility over Gaza. That was controversial about 48 hours ago. Less controversial now. Acknowledge that, well, they got to do something because they got to prevent the next terrorist attack, but they need to find a plan as quickly as possible to remove themselves, to extract themselves from the situation. So that's something that we continue to talk about, but when we get there is still a question mark. How long this war lasts, whether it's several more weeks or months, Jill. We're going to get a sense of that in the coming days as the Israelis continue to kind of close the gap in Gaza City.
Time now for the speed read from the Washington Post. The FDA approved Eli Lilly's diabetes drug for treating obesity, opening the door for widespread insurance coverage that could make the sought-after medication affordable for millions of patients. The approval, although widely expected, is a watershed moment for Lilly and a society grappling with the high costs of caring for patients with obesity. The drug is called Zepbound, and it will give patients another potent tool to lose weight. It also forces employers and insurers to reckon with covering the costs of an expensive drug that patients may have to take long-term to keep the weight off. The active ingredient is called tirzepatide. It's part of this new generation of appetite-suppressing drugs that, despite sometimes unpleasant side effects, have become sensations among Hollywood celebrities and people who have long struggled to lose weight and keep it off. The revolution in weight loss treatment comes at a pivotal time for public health in the U.S., when more than 14% of adults suffer from diabetes and almost 42% have obesity, according to the CDC.
Yeah, so this joins the party with Ozempic and Wegovy. This is just the latest option. The active ingredient, again, tirzepatide, is the second of a new generation of these drugs that treat type 2 diabetes, but also treat obesity. So the FDA already approved Ozempic and Wegovy in the last 5 years or so. Both drugs have the active ingredients. Like semaglutide, tirzepatide slows down the emptying of the stomach. People feel fuller, quicker, and for longer. All three drugs also target the area of the brain that regulates appetite, blunting cravings for many people. But as with Ozempic and Wegovy, the approval for Zepbound now is likely to increase demand that the manufacturers have struggled to meet. We've heard from people in the news community who struggle with diabetes who are like, I can't get my drug because everyone's using it for weight loss now. As far as how this new drug works, tirzepatide is injected once a week and communicates with receptors in areas of the brain that help regulate appetite, dialing up two naturally produced hormones in the gut that trigger that sensation of fullness. So we're going to continue to track this. I guess the more options, the merrier, Jill. But it's exploded in interest and popularity. So we'll see if these manufacturers can keep up.
And staying with the medical beat from Axios, the first pill approved to treat postpartum depression will be priced at $15,900 for a 2-week treatment course, according to its manufacturer. That drug is called Zurzuvae. The pricing decision had been a big question mark since the FDA in August approved the drug for postpartum depression, but not to treat overall depression. The company that makes it, it's called Sage, had previously said that the pill's price would be under $10,000 if it was also approved for major depressive disorder, which has a much larger patient population. An estimated 500,000 people are affected by postpartum depression each year.
Yeah, about 1 in 8 American postpartum women impacted by it. This newly approved medication at $15,900, Jill, for 14 days is just over $1,000 a pill over that 2-week regimen. Before insurance, it's TBD right now if insurance will cover it, who will cover it, how much of it they will cover it. But you can imagine a lot of patients will have trouble paying for this drug. So there is some certainty on what this will look like when it launches next month. And we should note, they tested it on people with severe depression, sort of the next level of drugs. The current options to treat postpartum depression are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs. These are antidepressants that take weeks to kick in and must continue to be taken on a daily basis for at least 6 to 12 months. You might be familiar with some generic SSRIs like Prozac and Zoloft. By the way, they typically cost about $20 a month. So nowhere near the cost of Zurzuvae. And, a lot of experts watching this are concerned that because this has gotten so much attention, people will be jumping to Zurzuvae, minus the cost, of course, without taking initial approaches, seeing a therapist, trying these SSRIs before jumping to this new drug. So we'll see what happens, but it is a very serious issue. And nevertheless, it's good to see the manufacturers and drug companies taking postpartum depression seriously and creating multiple options.
From the Wall Street Journal, Bumble's Whitney Wolfe is stepping down as chief executive of the company. She founded the female-focused dating app nearly a decade ago. In 2014, when she was just 24, Wolfe launched the dating app Bumble on the idea that having women initiate conversations with dating prospects would help weed out unwanted messages and put them in control of their romantic lives. She will be succeeded by Lydian Jones, who became the chief executive of Slack back in January. Jones will start as CEO of Bumble on January 2nd. Bumble, by the way, comprises of a handful of dating and relationship apps. So that includes Bumble, Bumble for Friends, Badoo, Fruits, that's with a Z and it's for Gen Z, and Official, which is a newly acquired app that aims to help couples strengthen their relationships.
I remember Bumble. I think, Jill, you were out of the dating game by the time Bumble came around. Or did you?
No, I was still in the dating game.
Well, you know what? You have the 2 kids, so I'm like, oh, she's been married a long, long time.
I'm just more thinking about this app Official. It's an app to help couples strengthen their relationships. Isn't the point of being in a relationship that you don't need to use a dating app?
Right. You're finally done with apps. It is interesting. Wolfe Herd's journey is remarkable, Jill. If some people might be familiar with this, she started over at Tinder, had huge issues there, actually a lawsuit there for the way she was treated, and said, I'm going to do my own thing. And there were certain points where Match Group, which owns Tinder and basically every other dating app, tried to buy her. And she's like, absolutely not. There's a fascinating podcast I suggest to anyone interested in kind of business history called Business Wars. And they go into the Bumble, Tinder, Match.com history. It's worth a few episodes. By the way, when she took her own company, Bumble, public, she became the youngest ever self-made female billionaire. That's when the stock was at its high. Right now, she's worth a cool 500 million plus, according to Forbes. So still not doing too shabby as she figures out her next steps.
Yeah, back in 2021, when she took that company public, she actually had her young son on her hip as she rang the opening bell at the NASDAQ. So which was pretty cool.
And this all comes at an interesting time for dating apps. There's a new Axios report on a new survey that shows that young people, the youngins these days, Jill, not as into dating apps. 79% of respondents, college and graduate students across the country, said they don't use any dating apps, even as infrequently as once a month. Among those apps, the most popular was Tinder, which about 12% said they use monthly. But the overwhelming majority of young people on college campuses say they prefer to meet the old-fashioned way, in person. It's interesting how all these things come around, Jill. One quote in the story, I feel dating apps have ruined the dating scene for many people my age and ruined their self-confidence. I'd rather meet someone in person. So there you have it.
Moshe, we did check in with our resident Gen Zer, Emily, who works on the Instagram account. And
we have a couple, actually, Jill, on the
she
team.
said she has about 10 dating apps on her phone. So she's not on board.
This doesn't apply to everybody. If you're a single in your mid-20s in New York, you're probably on a dating app, because as big as that city is, you still need to find a way to connect, because no one's talking to each other. Everyone's rude to each other. Anyway, interesting times, Jill. What do we got next?
And speaking of a sign of the times from Reuters, this year is virtually certain to be the warmest in 125,000 years. This is according to European Union scientists at the Copernicus Climate Change Service. Data from last month showed October was the world's hottest October on record when taken against the rest of 2023. They feel safe declaring that this is the hottest year ever. The heat is a result of continued greenhouse gas emissions from human activity, combined with the emergence this year of El Niño's weather pattern. El Niño is a natural climate cycle that temporarily warms part of the ocean, and then those warm waters come to the surface of the ocean, where they are then released as extreme heat into the atmosphere. The previous record for the hottest year was 2016, which was another El Nino year. The UN World Meteorological Organization expects the warming El Nino climate pattern to last at least until April of 2024, contributing to a further spike in temperatures. El Niño's impacts on global temperature typically play out in the year after its development, which unbelievably will mean next year may be even warmer.
Yeah, so I should say most El Nino years are now record breakers because they have that going on, plus climate change. Historically, the ocean has absorbed as much as 90% of the excess heat from climate change. A warmer planet means more extreme and intense weather events like severe droughts, those major storms where you get like a foot of rain in just a couple hours, hurricanes that hold more water. The global mean temperature right now is the highest ever recorded, just about 1.4 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Why is that significant? Because 1.5 is the threshold we've been trying to prevent ourselves from getting over, where we feel there could be some more catastrophic consequences. Sea ice down in Antarctica remains at record low levels. October marked the 6th straight month that we've seen Antarctic sea ice at very low levels. Jill, I mentioned on the podcast yesterday, November, very warm right now. You could be seeing summer-like temperatures, Thanksgiving where you are in the U.S. So it looks like this is a year for the record books. Mentioned yesterday, too, we're seeing many more record highs than record lows right now. But there is something to climate change, less global warming, but more global weirding. Just weird stuff we're seeing around the world just because things are being thrown out of whack. So another warning sign for all of us. And hopefully for the governments and companies out there that we need to continue to kind of figure out ways we can clamp down on greenhouse gas emissions.
Dare I say it feels refreshing to worry about the end of the world when it comes to climate weirding instead of the war in the Middle East.
Jill, one thing is for certain. We had wars in the Middle East before climate change, and they will continue into climate change.
From Politico, 3 of China's cutest and most beloved diplomats left Washington on Wednesday, marking a turning point in the struggling relationship between their home country and the United States. The diplomats, a trio of giant pandas who came to represent China's burgeoning global ambitions, as well as Washington's most popular zoo attraction. The arrival and departure of the pandas, which spawned merch lines and a cult-like following, traces the half-century relationship trajectory between the U.S. and China. One China expert saying, quote, "There is no doubt that this is a reflection of the state of bilateral relations. The pandas are supposed to unify the relationship with the United States, and the relationship between the U.S. and China is so bad anyway. What is the point of the pandas being here?"
Oh, come on. We love the pandas. We had to say goodbye yesterday to Mei Xiang, she's 25, Tian Tian, 26-year-old, and their son, Xiaoqi Ji, the 3-year-old. They were loaded onto 3 large shipping crates. FedEx apparently has the deal here. They have a special Panda jet that some people call Panda Express, Joe, the real Panda Express. And the live coverage was amazing to watch. We posted a couple clips. It was live coverage in D.C. yesterday. They had the helicopter going. They were documenting every move of the pandas from the zoo, the motorcade through the streets. It was like covering an inauguration in D.C. or the O.J. Bronco chase. Either way, it is the end here to a 50-year tradition. Hopefully it comes back at some point. Back in 1972, Pat Nixon, the first lady at the time, fell in love with them, and they were able to make a deal as Nixon opened up China for these pandas to come to Washington. Those original pandas, Ling Ling and Sing Sing, kicked off the panda fever here in America. They would eventually send pandas to a number of zoos across the country. DC would get another pair. That's Tian Tian and Mei Xiang, who came in 2000 and are being sent back now. I believe right now the last pandas are at the zoo in Atlanta, but they'll be heading back in the next few months. And then America will be pandaless for a while. And so China, has been doing this panda diplomacy for a very long time. But given that things have gotten pretty cold, they're like, no more pandas for you. So they have these huge enclosures that they've built at these zoos. So let's hope that, we'll continue this at some point. I remember it was quite a moment. I jokingly put up a clip from Anchorman on the Instagram feed. Anchorman with Will Ferrell documents like the panda diplomacy of that era. And it'll be sad. It'll be sad not to have any pandas here, Jill.
Well, President Biden is meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping next week in San Francisco. So maybe they can work something out.
It's on the agenda. Like, stop sending fentanyl to Mexico that's coming to America. Don't invade Taiwan. Can you,
TikTok.
Chill out on the Hamas support? Can you not send weapons to Putin? And also, can you give us a couple more pandas? Like we kind of want. Because otherwise, it's really hard for Americans to get to Chengdu.
And finally, from the New York Post, Andy Cohen has reportedly begged CNN to allow him and Anderson Cooper to drink while hosting the network's annual New Year's Eve broadcast on December 31st. Cohen telling E! News during BravoCon, "Hopefully I will not be sneaking it. I haven't heard anything yet, but come on, they need to let us drink. It is New Year's Eve. He says it didn't go well last year in terms of viewer happiness about us drinking. Yeah, I'm
No,
sure the
sobriety
viewers
was
cared.
not popular. Yeah.
He said people really cared, and I hope CNN gives the people what they want. He said, give the daddies some juice. The daddies being, of course, Angie Cohen and Anderson Cooper. If you remember back in November of 2022, CNN's then CEO, Chris Licht, had told staffers that on-camera drinking was prohibited as it damaged CNN's credibility in the eyes of viewers. Both Cohen and Cooper were spotted, though, taking mystery shots after CNN had reportedly banned alcohol from being on camera.
So, Jill, my favorite New Year's Eve was a couple years ago. It was 2021 when it was very clear that Andy had had too much to drink. And so he was throwing shade at Ryan Seacrest, who hosts one of the alternate New Year's Eve shows. Following a performance by Journey, Cohen called the band Ryan Seacrest's group of losers that are performing behind us in Times Square. He later admitted on Instagram that he may have drank too much. Andy saying, I was a hair overserved last night, but man, did I have fun. I hope you did too. Also, Jill, amazing moment. That was the last time Bill de Blasio was mayor, and Andy just proceeds to trash him as like the worst mayor in New York history, being like, good riddance to that guy. It was very entertaining to watch. Andy did not regret his words for Bill de Blasio, just for Ryan Seacrest. So those remarks, I believe he said, sayonara sucker to de Blasio. If Andy has his way, we might get some more entertainment on New Year's Eve, Jill.
But it wasn't just Andy Cohen and Anderson Cooper. It's like Don Lemon used to get absolutely drunk.
I think that was the core issue. If they could just keep it to Andy and Anderson, I think they would be fine. I think though, Don Lemon, Brooke Baldwin days, and those guys are they were allegedly serious journalists over there. And they would do ridiculous things. So I think they had to make a rule for everybody, but I feel like you should do a carve out for Andy and Anderson.
And Moshe, I know I suggested it in jest, but maybe we should do kind of a fun New Year's Eve podcast. Not really news. Maybe we could just have a cocktail with listeners and just talk or something.
All right, let's talk. Anyone listening, send us DMs with your ideas. Jill, open it up on your platform, and we'll come up with a New Year's Eve game plan. All right, on this day in history, November 9th, in 1967, Rolling Stone magazine made its debut, the bi-weekly popular culture magazine, founded by Jan Wenner. He actually got into some controversy recently with some of his remarks about female and black artists, but you can't deny the impact that Rolling Stone magazine has had over the years, including launching the careers of a number of famous authors, including a young Hunter S. Thompson. All right, back in 1938, on this day, Kristallnacht, or Night of Broken Glass, took place. It was 48 hours of anti-Jewish violence orchestrated by the Nazis in Germany and Austria, resulting in the destruction and vandalizing of synagogues and businesses and the death of 91 Jews. Staying in Germany here for this piece of history, on this day in 1989, the Berlin Wall was opened by the East German communist government. Jill, I remember in one of Thomas Friedman, the columnist's books, he talks about 11/9 and 9/11. 11/9 being the fall of the Berlin Wall, the opening of this open world, globalization, these this future of potentially no war, and then 9/11 reminding us just 12 years later, nope. The world has some other things in store for us. But a remarkable moment for those who might remember the images of the wall coming down, the symbol of the Cold War, the separation between the West and the East. Eventually, crowds would chip away at the wall, literally taking hammers to take little parts of the wall. And you can find parts of the Berlin Wall today all over the world in various museums. All right, we end here with a bit of pop culture. We actually mentioned this on the Instagram account, on the premium account yesterday. The Wu-Tang Clan celebrate a 30th anniversary today. New York City Mayor Eric Adams is celebrating by declaring today Wu-Tang Day. The Empire State Building will be lit up in their iconic black and yellow colors to commemorate their 1993 album, Enter the Wu-Tang. Jill, who's your favorite Wu-Tang member?
Not something that I actively think about. I'm thinking Old Dirty Bastard.
Old Dirty Bastard is the one you go
right?
with.
Yeah. I think he's probably my fave.
Yeah, no, Method Man and ODB are probably the two ones who kind of broke out at some point. The rest of them were all part of a group. And we were joking about this in the office because I was like, I remember in the 90s among my friends, like, can you name all the members of Wu-Tang? Because there's like a dozen of them that were in it. And they're like, no, we probably are much more likely to be able to name all the members of One Direction, which they then proceeded to do. On this day in 2012, One Direction's second album, Take Me Home, was released. So full circle.
Moshe, I cannot name all of the members of One Direction, but we did get a young Harry Styles from the group. So thank you for that.
You're a big Harry fan.
I am, actually. I love Harry Styles. Harry Styles and Taylor Swift. It's my connection to the young peeps. All right, Moshe, now it's time to take this home. We want to thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And review us in the App Store.
Jill, it was great to have you back. I'm going to go get some One Direction on my Spotify right now and hear the story of my life, as they say.
That is... The story of my life, it warms my heart. There's something about that song that just does it for me also. The story of my life. All right. Bye, everybody.
Later.